Hi, I'm Jacqueline Jones, your host of Promising Me Unleashed. We're so excited today to have with us our guests, two educators who work in the public school system. Our theme for today is Your Wealth is Your Mental Health. Dr. Lori McDowell and Mr. James McDowell are here with us today to talk about just that. Mr. and Mrs. McDowell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
So glad to have you. Today, we're here to talk about mental health as it relates to our youth. And I know that you have a bird's eye view of what that looks like. Before we get started, I'd just like for you to share with our guests, our viewers, a little bit about yourselves, how long you've been in the system, as educators, and just share with us a little bit about your experience in the school system.
Okay. Thank you. So nice to be here again. So I have my bachelor's in psychology from Howard University, master's in counseling from the University of Albany, New York, and a PhD in school psychology from Howard University as well. And since my bachelor's in the 90s, I worked with students in some DC schools, and we started talking about violence prevention and what that meant. And in the 80s and 90s, DC was a very, very violent place. You can go back and look at the statistics at that time. Crime and murder specifically were very, very high, and they were known as like the murder capital of the world.
Wow.
And so children from that time have had their own children, or maybe even grandparents now. And so that trauma looks intergenerationally for some students in DC. In New York, I worked in the college counseling centers, did some private practice, child and adolescent therapy, some family therapy, individual therapy, and is then coming back to the DC area, worked in various schools from K to 12. And school psychology really focuses more on assisting students with their educational dysfunction or disabilities, but also still has that layer of helping students with mental health disorders and assisting with interventions in the school system. That's
Awesome.
what I'm doing right now.
Awesome. Mr. McDowell?
Sure. This is my 22nd year in education. I have an associate's in paralegal studies, a bachelor's in public justice, and a master's in educational leadership. After 22 years, I actually started off in a daycare center originally. And
Wow.
from there, I got the taste for going into something else, something higher. And then I started working at the collegiate level on a college campus. And there I was able to see some of the mental health challenges that students were facing, who were not prepared, who were undiagnosed or diagnosed, and that they could not function on a day-to-day basis, socializing emotionally on the campus. And then from the collegiate level, I came to K-12 education, both public and private, working with students in our emotional disturbance program, our autism program, intellectual disabilities, and our general education system. And over the years, I found the same challenges that I saw at the collegiate level, but now with our babies. And we're parents, that are very well-to-do parents to our low-income parents, having the same challenges, but the resources look very different. And also whether they were families who were in the church or out of the church. And this is something that we have to face in both spectrums, in both sectors. So we're looking forward to sharing on today.
Awesome. And I know I spoke with Dr. McDowell a little bit before. Both of you are in the school systems, one middle school and one high school, correct?
Correct.
Yes. So I want to kind of start with Mr. McDowell first, and we're going to graduate, we're going to matriculate up to high school. But I wanted to talk about that because we look at critical time periods in a child's life. And I know personally, I transitioned from being in corporate America to coming home when my children were in middle school and then high school. It was important for me to be home and to really have a more hands-on approach. And that was a decision my husband and I made for us. The middle school, what did you find to be most prevalent amongst that school age as it relates to signs and things that were happening that you may have noticed with those students of that age?
Absolutely. And I think we can just even just talk about most recently coming out of the tragedies and the fears of COVID.
Yes.
And our babies, when they were in, say, 4th and 5th graders, over that 2-year mark, they missed the ability to socialize and to understand the ways that they should socialize properly. But also they were exposed to traumas in the home. And those traumas came into our school system. And in addition to that, the adults who may have been experiencing new traumas or a longer period of traumas, and that could look like verbal, physical, emotional violence, sexual violence. We have to look at those things because those things are real. And so what we find is that these students who are coming into our schools have experienced along the entire spectrum. And when they are now coming in our schools in 6th and 7th grade and 8th grade, we're seeing all of those behaviors explode. And they're not able to engage in the education in the classrooms. They're not able to properly socialize because they have high emotions or low emotions, and their behaviors are what's at the forefront. So when you have these things happening, and then you have some of the adults who have experienced the same things, it's like they are re-traumatizing each other. And when this is happening, you have to now say, okay, this is not a Band-Aid situation. This is a situation to where it really is a 911 situation. But now it's a matter of, okay, how do we get them to the trauma center?
Right.
And what are the resources that we need to have for the adult, who's the educator, but also for the child who needs the education? And you cannot educate and you cannot be an educator until you deal with the trauma, because they're bumping heads, and then you'll see the verbal explosions in the hallways, in the classrooms. And it's not every school that it's happening in, but it is happening. And we have to be very vigilant and creating a plan and then holding that plan with fidelity so that we can get our students back on track.
Awesome. And I'd imagine within that process, because is there a need for outside intervention outside of the school system? How do those, I guess, entities kind of work together, the school system, and then whatever resource that the school may look to try to support those students?
Well, it's kind of like what you're looking at right now. So I'm the one that would go in and perform a behavioral assessment or the assessment of the climate and culture of the building. But then I would need to connect with an outside resource or an in-house resource, such as our social workers or our psychologists. But what we're finding is we don't have enough of the in-house and the outside resources. And, I must say, because if I don't say it, then I would not be doing my due diligence. Some of our resources who are outside of our schools who are connecting, they're not properly equipped all the time to handle some of the behaviors. So our students are still not getting all that they need, which is, it's now falling upon the parents who don't have all that they need and they don't understand the needs of the child. So where does it fall then? It falls now on those who are skilled and who do understand to say, we have to start creating some other resources and connecting with other entities to say, these are our needs. Because currently, in various schools, no matter what school system you're in, Maryland, DC, Virginia, or New York, and we've been in all of those school systems, we're seeing that the resources are not available in terms of there are not enough counselors, there are not enough therapists, there are not enough psychologists. And I tell my wife and her colleagues who are psychologists quite often, I said that, you have to have an advocate to go to the table for you, because our social workers are overwhelmed, our counselors are overwhelmed, and we need more psychologists on the ground before you get to a medication state.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, these babies, they don't need medication right away, but it seems like, and it feels like, when I'm in these meetings, everyone's pushing medication, but they're not dealing with the
With the
actual
issue.
trauma. They're not dealing with what's actually taking place underneath. They're medicating it, they're putting a Band-Aid on it, and that's not the solution.
Right, right. And I know just as a byproduct of what's happening within our society right now, the pandemic has made it worse.
Absolutely.
There is a shortage of therapists, and I say therapists specifically, because even how they provide services now looks a lot different. People have gone to virtual as opposed to in person.
Yeah.
And that I understand has created some barriers in how quickly people can address some of the needs of those who are looking to garner from those resources. I want to just shift real quickly to high school, because I want to come back to that point as well. Dr. McDowell, what does high school look like right now?
High school looks probably very similar to middle school. With the students that I'm seeing, they kind of brought from middle school into high school. And so if they were having issues, or if they experienced trauma as a younger person, they're bringing all of that, plus the quarantine, plus the pandemic, plus the family issues, plus parents getting in the middle of a divorce, plus a sibling who also has some kind of mental health challenge, all to high school to say, I'm here, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to manage my anxiety or my depression or my eating disorder or various other things. And sometimes a combination of all three to be able to sit in class.
Right.
And so at the school that I'm at any time of day, you might have a student who has a panic attack in class. You might have a student who says, Dr. McDowell, can I just sit in your office for like 10 minutes? Because I just need to reset. We also have students who are on the autism spectrum. Sometimes walking in the hallway is just too loud for them. We can't announce fire drills or, practice lockdowns and things like that when the alarm goes off. And so they're reacting to that. And so it's a various number of things that are happening. We do have a social worker in the building who is available for students. And so the social worker's role is the therapist, but I also have that support role to check in with students, to kind of see how they're doing, to help them to ground themselves. Some students get nervous just on the way to school every day. And so they need that process of grounding to say, okay, I'm leaving home, I'm going to school, I'm going to be okay, and kind of try to plan out their day. And so I emphasize to students who are in therapy, please use the resources, the strategies, and the techniques that you learned every day when you're in the building. Because of course our major role is to educate students, but it's also to support their social emotional learning and their mental health.
Got it.
So at some of the schools I've worked with, we're seeing students who are experiencing anxiety and depression, eating disorders, and so all of those things can just completely confound students, and then they kind of get into their own thoughts. They aren't able to concentrate. They aren't able to kind of settle themselves emotionally, and they might need a moment in the office to, we call it reset themselves, because maybe from one class to another, they're like, that class seemed so challenging, or I saw my friend, they're not talking to me today. It could be a variety of things that seem smaller that kind of trigger them, set them off, and feel like, okay, I need a moment. And I think that's good because it's good for them to be able to recognize this has triggered me. I'm not at my best capacity right now, and I need a moment. Some other students need a half an hour or an hour of just kind of sitting still. I've had a student go to sleep in my office due to some physical injury and, you know, side effects of the medication she was taking, and but just kind of feeling like I'm not 100% right now. And so having those resources from that outside therapist, if they are seeing someone, that those techniques and strategies that they can use, whether that is deep breathing or progressive muscle relaxation, kind of finding a replacement for intrusive thoughts. Those are some of the things that they'll learn and that we encourage them to use on a regular basis. Some other students might feel like I'm having problem coming to school, like coming to the actual school building, because that's anxiety producing as well. And so again, we go back to, okay, what do you need to be able to ground yourself, to be able to say, okay, I'm leaving home, I'm on my way to school, I'm gonna be at school, I'm okay, I can do this. Some students do have their kind of personal mantras and things that they just constantly encourage themselves to think about or do, and again, to replace those negative thoughts.
I think it's important for Lori to actually talk more about what those intrusive thoughts are and to define that for the general public that we try to shy away from.
True. So intrusive thoughts could be negative self-talk. I can't do this. You're not really smart enough. And why are you in AP calculus? You know, you can't do this. Or other intrusive thoughts could be of self-harm, like that deep distressing feeling inside. And the only thing for some students is to scratch their skin or to burn themselves in some way. You know, I've learned that some students can take almost anything and cut or scratch different parts of their bodies, their arms, their legs, their stomachs. And we talked about warning signs earlier. So students who are always wearing long sleeves, are always wearing, you know, pants and like the socks tucked in, and just kind of, you know, you get that feeling as an adult or even another teenager, like, what's going on? Like, this person just seems uncomfortable with themselves. There's a possibility that that student is self-harming or cutting their skin in some way. I've learned that some students will take a paper clip and unfold it and use that, the tip of it, or even the soda can tab, and they'll use that part, they'll break it off and use that part to cut. Even the top of the eraser on a pencil, they pull the eraser off and use that.
And I'd imagine people would not think of those types of things. We generally look at the highs and the lows.
Exactly.
You know, those two, you know, but there could be children right in the middle who may not be, you know, off the chain or just really, really quiet.
Yes.
But we may be missing some kids. I think that's what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Because we have stereotyped what mental health should look like.
Yeah,
that's right.
But we could be, you know, missing those little subtleties that they come out later on. But they could have been noticed a little bit earlier if someone had paid a little bit more attention. The parents, how are the parents? Are the parents informing or are the teachers informing?
Well, at the middle school level, I'll say this. We're dealing with a population now to where the parents were self-medicating because of their trauma. And because of their self-medicating, or they've been able to hide it for so many years or even decades, what they were dealing with. And because they have not dealt with their own trauma and some of their own mental health issues, now you're seeing it manifest through the child. So we have students who are 5th and 6th graders who are chronically smoking marijuana, alcoholism, doing other drugs, and self-harm to a way where it's it shocks you to your core. You're saying, my God, how could this baby get to this point?
Mhm.
And then you meet the parents,
Right.
and the parents are breaking down in the meeting and saying, they're going through what I went through because I never got this dealt with. And now we're saying, okay, we need some mental health services. We need a therapy for the family,
Mhm.
but also for individuals.
Mhm.
But what has to be said, in all honesty, is that we're seeing a mass exit of our therapists and professionals from the educational system,
Yes.
Mhm.
either because they're burnt out
Mhm.
or because they're feeling like they're not appreciated. But also some are leaving, quite honestly, because the pay is better in private practice.
Right.
And they're leaving, but then they're coming back to partner with the schools.
Thank
But in
goodness.
that process,
Mhm.
they've left some of these babies unkept, and
Mhm.
these babies have gone through another trauma of separation anxiety.
Right.
And so now their behaviors escalate again, and then you're back to ground zero trying to build them back up again. So how do we fix that is the answer, and what do we do to repair that? And so we have to come together, the schools, the churches, the community leaders. We have to come together and pull our resources together to better service our students and families. Because on the back end, what's going to happen is where you have parents taking care of their children, and then at some point they're supposed to be able to retire and relax. But you're seeing everyone remain in the same home,
Mhm.
and neither one, because they have not dealt with the mental health illnesses or the traumas. They're in the same home and they're self-medicating now together.
Mhm.
And it's exploding in such a way that people are not talking about. And I'm not just talking about in the secular world. This is even happening right in front of us in our churches,
Yes.
because we don't want to deal with some of these issues. We don't want to deal with it because it may put a stain. But
Right.
I'd rather deal with it and not worry about a stain
Mhm.
before we lose someone to self-harm, or
Right.
someone who is successful and they have put a plan out to take their life. And that's
Mhm.
something we don't want to talk about. We don't want to talk about suicide,
Yeah.
or we don't want to talk about the fact that maybe the child or the person is not thinking about suicide, but they're thinking about taking someone else's life.
Right. We've got to find ways to deal with it. I think the biggest thing is accepting the fact that there is something wrong.
Yes.
We have to be willing to say there is something wrong. There's something different about my child. There's something that there seems to be a barrier or a block, but we have to be able to accept that there is something wrong. And parents, as we all know, we hold our children dear sometimes, often to their own hurt, because we're not addressing things that need to be addressed.
Yes.
And I can imagine when the school system receives that child, they then become the parent. You got to think about it. These children are at school longer than their interaction really with their own parents.
Absolutely.
By the time the parent gets home, it's 5, it's 6 o'clock, in normal circumstances where dinner is being done, and by 9 o'clock, everybody's going their separate way. So there isn't often enough time with the parent to be able to sit and really observe. And I think that's one of the things, that my mother used to say, charity begins at home. And there was so much truth to that, spending the time that they need to spend with their children so that they can come to school. We are living in a different time.
Absolutely.
We are. And we have to be very honest about how we're going to go about assisting these children that have to matriculate. They have to graduate out, or, they're going to get older. How do we deal with that? What does that look like for the school system right now? Knowing everything that we know.
Right.
How can we better address the issue of mental health? We know we're going to lose some. We need to just accept that fact. We're going to lose some, but we don't have to lose them all.
Right.
How can we build the right bridges to support these children and the families?
And I think you're right on point. We have to first acknowledge something is not right. We've spoken before, and one of our sons' names is Jonathan, so we don't use little Johnny in our examples. So I'll say little Bobby, right? If little Bobby, stares in space during class, if he does not have any friends, if he's by himself at lunch, if he, in some of his essays, they're not addressing the question, but not in the way that he doesn't understand the content, but that his thoughts are not together, that's a sign that this child, something is wrong with this child, acknowledging that first. And as you said, we hold our children so closely that if anything is not right with them, we take it as a personal insult. Like, what did I do to my child?
Right. We
got to get over that and then say, okay, what do I have to do as a parent to help my child? And so I think both of us have seen children's parents address it across a wide spectrum. Some are completely in denial and like, oh no, they just have to talk to people.
They got that from me. I'm like that. Yeah, you hear that a lot. I used to be shy like that.
Right. Those kind of explanations. Oh, they'll grow out of it. Not this isn't that kind of situation, right? And then you have other parents who are like hyper vigilant and who email or call all the time. And so we got to find that right balance that you have to provide that support, the external support, or be in contact with the school. So in my role as a school psychologist, as the dean of students, as the social worker, or with the main office with the administration, principal, assistant principals. But there are community resources. There are agencies that can assist students wherever they are. The starting place is the school. And I must say that the school is not everything. Right. The school districts have acknowledged that we need to have the personnel and the resources available. But the school cannot do and provide therapy like an outside therapist can. Of course, like you said, we're the ones that the child sees most of the, a significant part of the week, and outside therapy might be once a week for 45 minutes. And like you said, these days it has been virtual instead of in person. And so our job as a school system is to provide those resources for students. And so what we're trying to do is to provide small groups in the school. Again, that to get the educational piece, to do the study skills and organizational skills and things like that, to minimize stress overall, but to also provide groups that do deal with trauma, that acknowledge this is a group to deal with trauma, that you're coming here to acknowledge that 1, I've had a trauma, 2, it's affecting my life, and 3, I know I need to do something about it. Wow. In high school, I encourage all parents to get, if you know your child has a serious or possibly serious mental health challenge, is to get power of attorney, because when your child turns 18, there's nothing you can do to assist them and to help them take care of themselves. Right. Some parents embrace that, others don't. But I feel like I'm obligated to say that. So parents will later be able to have more options available to them if the need arises.
Right. And that's so important because there comes a point where that child cannot speak for themselves. And you can get caught up in a system where other people are navigating that child's life. And sometimes you fall into the right hands, but there are many times people do not. And I'm so observant of when I'm out, out and about, and I see a young person pushing a shopping cart, if you will. I'm very cognizant of those things, and I concern myself with, did the system somewhere fail that child? Yeah. Was there such a breakdown in the family where that child is now on the street and not living a wealthy life because there is a mental health challenge that went unchecked?
Yes.
So it's so important. One other question that I had, are there any supports within the school system for the teachers?
Absolutely, and that's something that's a great question, because I was sitting here, and as Lori was speaking, the first thing I thought about is our staff wellness.
Mhm.
Our staff members, including ourselves, we're working, over 50 hours a week at times, and you have staff members who are they're burned out. And our schools, they are requesting more, they're requiring more, the extended school years. They've gone to a place now to where, because of our ability to conduct education now virtually, like some of those snow days that educators look forward to, there's talks about taking those away.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I don't think people are really thinking about the fact that, how hard and how much time and how emotional it is for staff members that they're putting in every single day.
Mhm.
And the majority of them, the majority of us, just because we're there from 7:30 to 4:30,
Mhm.
doesn't mean after 4:30 we stop thinking
Right.
about
And
our
you have your
students'
own
day.
families, you're not
Right.
just, it's not just the student, you've got to go home to your own homes
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
and deal,
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that mental well-being and that wellness is, you really try to encourage staff is to take time for yourself, turn that phone off, don't read an email,
Mhm.
Mhm.
because you have to recharge. And when there is a 3-day weekend or a holiday coming up, I tell them now, I said, when my boots hit the ground, when I come to the building, I'm on the floor.
Mhm.
If I'm there 8 hours a day, I'm on the floor 7.5 hours a day, making sure I'm checking classrooms, I'm checking in on students.
Mhm.
And they often say, Mr. McDowell, do you ever sit down? And my wife and kids, quite often they say,
Did you eat today?
did you eat?
Right.
Did you eat
Critical.
lunch? Yeah.
And so we're always pouring out.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I would encourage any educator to do is to make sure that you are performing self-care and
Mhm.
taking care of yourself. And if you are feeling like you're getting burnt out, or you're feeling like your battery needs to be recharged, you have to be honest about it. You have to be open about it to someone that you trust, because you can't tell everyone that. I got to be
Right.
honest, because if you share with the wrong person, it could go a whole nother way.
Mhm.
But I tell my staff is, come tell me, and we're going to figure this out, because I want you to be whole. Because if you're not whole, then our students can't be whole, and you can't give them all that's inside of you to give them. And the last thing I want to say is we have to be willing also to move from our fixed mindsets to a growth mindset. So
Wow.
something that we may be used to doing, if it's not working that way, and someone comes along and offers a better route to support our students in their social, emotional, and their educational needs and their mental health needs, we have to be willing to say, let me move my mind and let me be able to retrain my thinking, so that we can assist them. And then having the willingness to back up. And I tell people that's not my lane.
Mhm.
So my lane is the social, emotional, the behavior, the functional behavior assessments, behavioral plans, support plans for students. When it gets to the larger mental health pieces and mental health, I say, okay, time out, pause. That's not my lane. Let's refer that to Dr. McDowell.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I love what you said about the growth, and you have to be willing to shift and make changes where it's necessary in order for everyone to grow. Mental health does not have a socioeconomic discrepancy. It doesn't have race discrepancy.
Yep.
It doesn't have a cultural discrepancy. It infiltrates all lines, and we can't put a Band-Aid on it, as you said earlier. It does need to be addressed at a higher level, and in many cases at a very, very expeditious level, in order to save not only ourselves, but to also save our youth. Your wealth is your mental health.
Yeah.
Say what you want to say. A mind is a terrible thing to waste. We've heard that. It sounded a little cliche, but as we move along and we see what's happening in our society today, we realize that it's a really big issue that is enlarging itself. It can be helped, it can be addressed, but we need willing people like yourselves that stay in the trenches to support families, staff, teachers, the whole gamut, the whole school system. So this is just the beginning. I'm feeling like we have not even really scratched the surface of this issue. We dug a little in there, but I want you two to come back.
Sure.
Because I feel like there are some building blocks within both of you that could really form an overall area of study and practice that will support our students and the staff that work with the students within the school system. So I hope that you will come back. Is there anything else that you feel is vitally important that you should share with our listeners today?
Just when you look at statistics from different organizations, the National Institutes of Health, all of us are going to experience something in our lives that takes us off center. The death of a loved one, right? A move, a divorce, a car accident, a fire, something
A pandemic.
right, a pandemic that no one saw coming. And so we first have to James's point with acknowledging, if you're an educator, acknowledging I am stressed. You have to first acknowledge that in yourself to be able to give that to anybody else in any capacity that you're in, whether you're a wife, a husband, an uncle, a child, a parent. And so if all of us could take that understanding, take the stigma off of mental health challenges, all of us will have a mental health challenge, full stop, period. Acknowledging that, and then saying, I'm not okay. I love the new, I believe, advertisement. I'm not sure who it's from, but they say it is okay to not
be okay.
But you have to tell someone that. And we have to be sensitive enough with each other to say, yeah, I don't think you're yourself today. Are you okay? And then we have to honestly answer the question and say, no, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
I think that's the first step at any age. And then we can really start having these full conversations.
One of the things you're talking about masking, as African-American men, this is something that we've been taught for generations, to never show our emotions, to never talk about what's hurting us because it's a sign of weakness. And for me, and I can say personally, it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of dying, it's a sign of death if you don't deal with it. And you can, open up to different sicknesses and different challenges that can affect your personal life, can affect your home life. And one of the things that we found out was that, and I tell people, we're in the post-pandemic in terms of the scale of it. And we found out just, within our own home, in all transparency, and to let people know, we don't sit in the seat of judgment, but we sit in the seat with you. We're partnering with you. Yes. Because one of our children, actually all three of our children, but one of our children, their high school senior year was the year that they should have been proud to be a senior. Right. On their campus with them and their friends. That senior year was taken away. And then the following year should have been the freshman year in college. That was taken away. Everything was virtual. And we found out that there was some depression there. But we didn't find out until we said, wait a minute, something's changed. Something's not right. Something's going on. And then he finally shared was that he was angry about that. And he actually got to a place where he said, I don't like education anymore. Because what I was told, he felt like he was sold a false bill of sale. Your high school year is going to be a great year. It's going to be your best year. Your freshman college is going to be great. You're going to meet new people. But we were all home. We were stuck in beyond cabin fever. So got to a place that I hate education. And we were like, whoa, wait a minute. You hate education. But I had to humble down as a father and listen to the voice of my wife. And I was like, I don't understand this piece because no, we have these plans laid out for them. And what do you mean? And I think we have to humble down and we have to be willing to listen to our spouse, listen to others and say, okay, and then also reach out. Right. Okay, this is what I need to make my family whole. I can say that for my son, but when it came to me, I completely shut down.
Mhm.
And it took some tragedies to happen before I could open up.
Mhm.
So we just have to look at that and say, okay, what do we need as a community? What do we need as individuals? And who are those experts?
Yeah, it's something that, just listening to what you just said, you can't miss what you never had is not really quite true.
Right.
Your son saw what senior year could look like.
Mhm.
He's heard what a freshman year in college could look like. And there is some anticipation for those great events.
Yes.
Mhm.
Even as I sit here right now, I'm having more of a reflective moment, and more of almost an apology, because initially I was like, well, they can't miss what they never had, but it's not true, because you build them up
Right.
to want and to expect these events to happen, and then they don't happen. We don't realize how children might internalize that. And we know the pandemic really did a job on our young people. I've heard in other settings where the children, after being out so long, when they came back together into the classroom, they didn't even know how to communicate with each other.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Even though they were on Zoom
Yep.
in their homes, they were
Mhm.
seeing each other.
Mhm.
They came to this social setting
Yes.
and did not know how to communicate.
Yes.
And I can take this conversation in a whole lot of different directions too, because when I start thinking about social media and thinking about even texting and
Mhm.
how you abbreviate everything,
Yes.
and then you get in an environment where you have to talk, and the children don't, it's as if that skill was never developed in
Right.
how to speak a full sentence.
Yes.
And that can become very traumatizing for a child as well.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. One of our sons,
Mhm.
we quite often would tell him and his friends, it was like, yeah, Dad, it costs 5K. I said, five what? I said, you mean 5,000? And then he would say, yeah, 1 point. I said, wait a minute. Just say it's 5,000. He said,
Right.
and so that's what they learned. And I said, what are you doing? I said,
Yeah.
can you stop speaking to me in text?
What is IDK?
Yeah, right. Right.
What is Lumbo? I'm still trying to figure out some of these acronyms.
But he
you
was doing this numerically.
Mhm.
Him and his
Mhm.
friends were doing this numerically. When they were talking about, the other acronyms, we were up on those. But when it came to the numerics, I was like, wait a minute, stop. I said, you can't do that.
Despite what's going on in the world, I think we still can make changes and create environments where the wealth of a child is improved because of the wealth of their mind. So I thank you two both so much for joining us today on Promising Me Unleashed. You've already said yes, that you will be back. So I'm taking that all as a yes. And I thank you both so much for being our guest on Promising Me Unleashed.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
for
much.
having us.
Awesome.